Hi everyone, we're going to continue talking about species interactions today. So last time we were here together, we copied down this table here. So our real goal now is going to be going through each of these different types of interactions and really getting to the grip of what it actually means here. So we are going to start with competition. So ways in which species interact. We know that these are the 5 main categories that we just saw with our table there, and either we're going to see if these species are benefiting, harming, or really not having any effect on each other over time. So that's how we really determine how species interact. There are other types of interactions possible, but again, usually these types of interactions are indirect or they don't really fit into a category very clearly. And then sometimes there are just some that are so rarely found that we don't categorize them. So therefore, some of these interactions might not be categorized or studied well. So we really want to focus on those 5 different types. So let's start with our first type, which is competition. So again, we know that competition is an interaction where both species are harmed in the process. So again, a relationship between 2 species or 2 individuals in which both species or individuals attempt to use the same limited resource such as in that they are both negatively affected in this relationship. So again, an example here could be foxes and coyotes. Both foxes and coyotes have a similar food niche. So what that's going to mean is that both these animals are hunting for the same type of food. They're competing over it, and since that food source is limited, both of them are going to be negatively affected because neither of them really will have as much food as they want or as much food as they need in that situation. So there are a couple different types of competition. So members of the same species that must compete for their food sources of the same niche. Again, niche are those resources that animals need to survive within the area in which they live. So this type of competition is going to be called intra-species, intraspecific competition. So INTRA, specific competition. So that's between the same species. And then when it's members of different species that are competing for these overlapping niches, overlapping resources, that's going to be called interspecific competition. So INTER, specific competition. So of the same species, we see intra-specific competition. Of different species, we see interspecific competition. And then we also have something called indirect competition. So species can compete even if they never come into contact with one another. And some examples of that here, we have our insects that feeds on a certain plant during the day, and then we have a different species that might feed on that same plant during the night. They're still competing for the same resource, but at different times of the day, so these are going to be indirect competitors. And again, humans in a lot of cases are also indirect competitors as well. So we're both trying to eat the same plant as these insects, but we probably never come in contact with those insects as we're taking that food for us to eat as well. But again, we're still competing with those insects in some ways. So what are some adaptations here that we're going to see? When 2 species who have similar niches, remember that a niche is the resources and that an organism needs in that certain location where they live. So when 2 species of the similar niches are placed together in an ecosystem, we might see one species be more successful than another. And that might be because of the adaptations that they've occurred or gotten through this competition. So over evolution, adaptations that decrease competition are going to be at more an advantage of those species. So again, here are some examples. So one way to reduce competition is to reduce species by dividing up their niche in time or space. So an example here for time could be that feeding at night versus during the day. That might be more beneficial to one species over another. And then again, space. We talked a little bit about that a while back with that tree. So we had one species of bird living at the top of the tree and another species living at the bottom. They were still using the same resource, but since they weren't in the same space, there was less competition between species there. And then we also see niche restriction. So this is when species uses less of a niche than they are capable of using. And it's observed with some different species with the same resource habitat. So remember that within your niche, you have a specific amount of resources, whether that be food, space, water, all these different things. But when animals use just a small amount of their niche instead of the entire one, this is a way that they can kind of adapt to competition and lessen the competition between those resources. So a great example again is that tree. So we have species at the top and species at the bottom. We can also see that with barnacles happening here. So one species of barnacles, though it could use the space of the entire intertidal zone, it chooses just to use the upper level when other barnacle species are present, even though it could survive in the whole level here. So the actual niche used by the species may be smaller than its potential niche. So let's take a look at what that might look like here. So our red barnacles here are only living at the top of the intertidal zone because these blue barnacles are present. If we had them scattered across, we could see that these red barnacles might be competing for food, light, water, whatever it may be. Though if these blue barnacles weren't present, we would see that these red ones would populate the entire intertidal zone. So that's really that niche restriction that I was talking about here. So it uses less than it can or is able to, but it allows that species to survive better. It has adapted for change a little bit better here. So this is a great example of that niche restriction right here. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll see you next time.